Now, I have some honesty to fess up to, something to tell about myself that feels pretty vulnerable for me to share, something that I'm even a little bit afraid to talk about. But talking about courage and change, I think this demands it. The truth is that I really don't practice my violin as much as I should. This is something that I know I'm not alone in, as it's something that is true for a lot of musicians and those of us that play music. Anyone else play any music and not practice much? I can kind of envision there are some hands up in our grid. Growing up playing the violin, I actually really wasn't very good at practicing. I remember my mom would encourage me to practice every day by setting a countdown timer up on my music stand. And I remember loathing to practice as the screen counted down the time that I had to stand there and play. For one, I didn't find the scales, arpeggios, and other technical exercises as fun as playing real music. And likewise, I always felt really bad about my practicing. It just never sounded good to me, or as good as I had wanted it to be. What's funny is that even though my practicing was fairly irregular, I would somehow manage to pull things off for recitals and performances, at least early in my career. My mom and uncle actually tell me that it's a family gene and trait of somehow being able to play a piece well and seamlessly without practicing. Though, as I grew older and those pieces became more challenging, I realized that there was something deeper lying beneath the surface of my dislike of practicing. In truth, I really carried a lot of shame about my violin playing. As a 5-year-old learning to play, I felt intimidated and inexperienced when I would compare myself and my playing to others. And at that early point in my learning, I had developed this sort of construct of who I thought I was. At the time, I thought that if I really was smart, then I should be able to pick up music or try out a new piece just like that. To fail or to sound bad, in my view, was to prove that I wasn't as smart as others, that there was something wrong or different about me with music. I didn't realize a lesson that I would learn much later, especially after studying music in college. The truth is that music takes a lot of practice and that you don't develop further without it. And even though my mom swears to me up and down that I took to the violin quite naturally, that I avoided a lot of those screechy metallic sounds that a person starts with at the early point in their playing, I still deeply internalized this message of shame with music. In fact, it's a message that I am actually still learning to unlearn as an adult, as I strive to do and share more music with myself and also others. And even after trying and trying and trying to change my routines to add 30 minutes to an hour, what seems like such a small amount of time of daily practice into my life, I still hear that annoying voice coming up over and over again. And I still feel a shame with playing that I can't seem to shake, even though my heart loves to play and share music with others. So how many of you can relate to a sense of shame like this? How many of you have at one point picked up a musical instrument and immediately felt like it, for whatever reason, wasn't for you? And for those of you who are just absolutely not musicians, when in your life have you felt ashamed because of something you felt like you just weren't good at? Perhaps with homework and test taking, even feeling that you weren't good or smart enough at math, or that you couldn't ever read and write well enough. What about times where you felt even scared or afraid? That even picking up or trying something new made the weight too heavy to bear to give it a try. This morning, we're exploring this theme of change and how changes come into our lives. Change is something that we're all familiar with, especially in this past year and a half of pandemic. Change itself seems to have a nature that is twofold. And on one hand, there are changes that we can elect, decisions that we can choose and make about our lives and actions that we want to take. And yet, On the other hand, there are changes that are completely out of our own control. The start of a global virus, the monumental and seismic shifts to daily life that have required social distancing and face masks, the changes that emerge in our lives around love and loss, the passing of a loved one, as well as the growing love between partners, the transformations that occur within ourselves that span our entire lives as we are molded and shaped until we are completely different from where we even started. As I said to you all in my weekly message this past week, change itself seems inevitable, just as it's also the name of the game these days. UUCGT itself is at an intersection of both of these types of change. The changes that we can control of adding new systems, procedures, and equipment to make the future of our services possible, both for online and also in person. The changes of excitement as we start anew this year with fresh hearts and minds set on coming back together stronger as a community and being more aware and active and involved in our wider area. And yet, we are also met with the changes of this whole unfurling situation of increasing COVID rates and rising case numbers. And even if things weren't already difficult enough, life itself doesn't stop. Even in our personal lives, we are met face to face with changes we have little say or control over from time to time. These changes are hard, and often they feel unfair. The question is not whether change happens, but instead why they happen and how we can continue to live our lives in their wake. A change is gonna come, oh yes, it will. In reflecting on this difficult place in which we find ourselves, I was reminded of a book that I read in seminary from a course on leadership and administration. This was a book that taught me more about myself as well as the underlying shame that I carried with music, especially as I couldn't seem to make a change in my life for more practice time. In this book called Immunity to Change, they describe what happens when we are faced with the difficulties of change in a way that I think meets both of these places right where they are. That place of being both in control of and also at the mercy of change. Authors Keegan and Leahy define what they mean by immunity to change in the excerpt that Amanda shared with you for our reading. They describe it as a dynamic equilibrium, how even though we may want to be in control of change and make changes in our lives, we are also, in their words, systematically working against the very goal we genuinely want to achieve. Though you are not aware of it, you have created a very effective anxiety management system, and that system is what we call the immunity to change. We run these systems at a cost. Inevitably, there are blind spots preventing new learning and constantly constraining the action in some aspects of our living. This immunity to change describes how we can sometimes get in our own way with the changes we want to make, as well as the changes we are faced with in our everyday life. More importantly, they describe these internal systems that we have built up throughout our lives that keep us from new discoveries. We react with a sort of immune system response, like in our bodies, to change when changes arise. And I think this is exactly at the same point of intersection between what we can both control and can't control. While we can make plans for change in our future, there are also systems within us that we are subject to, that we also cannot always control. For me, this idea was transformative in naming this immunity to change that I had with the violin. For so long, I had struggled to name what it was that exactly I was bumping up against when trying to set up a better practicing schedule to play more music. I was bumping up against an anxiety management system within myself that felt hurt and wounded from shame. Every time I'd pick up my instrument to practice, an internal voice again would speak to me about being inadequate and not smart enough. And in the end, I learned that my immune response to change was to avoid practicing altogether. It felt safer and more comfortable to avoid it rather than facing up to the shame that I carried. And while I can say that I am not still through all of that shame, I can say that there is a power in being able to name it. There's a strength in being able to name what it is that's holding us back when we are unable to understand or make changes in our lives as we might have hoped. And today I can meet that immune response with a sense of grace and gentle understanding. I can set down the weight of needing to be a professional violinist or playing perfectly all the time in order to have fun. And through facing this shame, I've since been able to play more music and share it more abundantly with others in more life-giving ways. I invite you to really think about this for a moment. What changes have you been unable to make in your own life? And what happens to you when you are faced with and confronted with change? What sensations do you notice in your body coming up? If it's not shame, what underlying emotions are you confronted with when changes feel daunting or scary? More importantly, what anxieties or fears might be lying just underneath the surface that have you stuck right where you are? I don't know each of your lived experiences with change personally, though I know as a congregation, we have shown ourselves ready and eager to face up to change. We've seen this especially with the ways that we've adapted to the uncontrollable and unforeseen changes in the last year. In truth, the pandemic has redefined us altogether with the ways that we gather and hold our services. Before the pandemic, I can pretty safely say that even just the thought of streaming services online probably seemed unthinkable. The learning curve for doing such a thing seemed so far out of our reach, especially with many in our community for whom technology is still a great challenge. And if you look at us now, we are preparing to do way more than just streaming online services. We've also started a YouTube archive of past sermons and messages, as well as other things we are envisioning, imagining what might be possible in this new year and chapter together. Now, the authors name a core component to change that we cannot forget about: courage. They write, "Courage involves the ability to take action and carry on even when we are afraid. No matter how big or consequential a given step may be, that step cannot be said to involve courage if we are not somehow afraid to take it. It may show us how smart we are, how energetic, how focused, but not how brave. It is action in the face of fear that demonstrates courage." In Betsy's Time for All Ages, I don't know about you, but for me, I was shocked to learn that a caterpillar itself doesn't actually build a chrysalis. Instead, the chrysalis has actually been within the caterpillar all along, as it sheds its skin and reveals its inward sight of change and transformation just ready to unfold. There's a wisdom there that connects all of these ideas together. While we may not always be in control of changes that we are faced with, we can be courageous in understanding that we have a power within ourselves to embrace change, even the harder ones. And though we may be subject to our own anxieties and immune responses at times, we are given a power with peeling back our tough skin, noticing where it is that we are hurting and wounded, as well as where we are also developing and growing. In unveiling this sight of transformation, we are able to see change as an inevitable partner in life, and not from a place of fear, but from a place of gentle understanding. And after all of it, we may even be completely different than when we started. We may even find a butterfly or two that emerge. To close, may you find yourself opened up to this power of change, a power that is dynamic and moving both outside of you and also within you. May you find the subtle parts of your life where you're still finding yourself stuck, unable to change things in the ways that you had hoped. And when all is said and done, may you find yourself transformed to do the important work that needs to be done in our community and world. May we greet change not as a hostile enemy, but as a dancing partner in life, challenging us and encouraging us as we navigate the journey ahead. So, dear ones, that is my message for you this morning. May you embrace the goo of these times. May you embrace the change and the magic that comes with it, even at times when it is rather difficult and it may be a bit scary. May it be so, and amen.